Welcome to WHACHACHA'S Wargaming Journey. My name is Sweetness WHACHACHA, and this is the third episode, The Flames of War Problem, Terrain, and Theater of War. What's going on, Sweetness? You just solved that problem. The Flames of War problem, what does that mean? Well, let's tackle that first. So, although I have selected that as my game that I'm going to throw my weight behind, it is a little problematic because it is in 15 millimeter. Now that does, as I said in the last episode, help me in terms of having a large scale battle and being able to put a lot of tanks and move them very far and stuff, and planes and things like that. But most of what I own in terms of terrain and the ability to create terrain is in 28 millimeter, or what they call 28 millimeter heroic scale. Now, what that means is it's 20 millimeter, but hands are a little thicker, arms are a little thicker, and heads are a little bigger. It's not a truly to scale, but it actually, I know it's unintuitive, but they actually look more natural, and also you won't be breaking your hands and things like that off very easily. Now, I would say they kind of fall frustratingly between kind of HO and O scale. Those are two very common scales you'll find for model train stuff and other modeling stuff, and so you want to combine them. Often you'll find that HO scale stuff is too small, and O scale stuff is much closer, but sometimes maybe a little too big or doesn't quite look right. When I played other games before, I generally err on the side of getting O scale things. Now, I also have a great deal. I've got about 60 molds from this company called Hearst Arts, which I think are incredible. I've used them to make 3D dungeons. I've used them to make 3D just environments for various board games and things. And you cast a lot of these plaster pieces and put them together. I don't prefer 3D printed stuff. I know that's a very popular avenue nowadays, but I always see those lines. And one common thing you do when you paint things is to dry brush, and that just picks all those lines up. And I personally, and I'm not icking your yum, if you enjoy those things, I look at a 3D printed thing and I do not like it. I see it instantly, I can tell that it's 3D printed, and I don't really care for it myself. But I've got a lot of little resin pieces, and I'll pick up things here and there from shops and things. If I see something interesting, I'll make a note of that particular company and stuff, and I'll be able to look them up in the future. But I've got a lot of stuff that I have for that scale. And my Hearst Arts stuff, I can pump out tons of two-door houses. I've got the wood and the siding and stuff for them, brick houses and things. I have tons and tons of sandbags. I can make hundreds of sandbags very, very easily. And so I like having that as a resource. I also have molds to make fortifications, which would be great for things like a D-Day landing or something. And then, I've got these other games that I played, that come with, tank traps and things like that. And, it's easy to make barbed wire. I've got a bunch of barbed wire. I can make it quite easily, like scale to scale. And then, of course, there's a lot of brands like Tamiya and stuff like that you can actually go out and buy if you want to supplement or to add little pieces here and there. So with a 15 millimeter game, that puts the kibosh on all of that, and in trees, that's another thing. I've got tons of trees and things. So I'm not going to have access to any of that by playing Flames of War as it is. Now, the other thing is, I don't really care for the miniatures in Flames of War. Now, I love the vehicles. I think they look great. The tanks look amazing. But the infantry themselves, I'm not a huge fan of when I'm looking through the books. Now, using Dust Tactics as an example, when you look through those hardcover books and you're looking at the little dioramas and stuff, there's no mistaking why they put that stuff in there. You read about the game and you look at the pictures and your imagination, you're like, that's amazing. But first of all, there's just something beautiful about miniatures and dioramas and things that you look at, and it's aesthetically makes you excited, and whatever makes people want to make model train sets and things, that's in there. And so you see those pictures and they inspire you both to play and to create and to paint, and I love that. Looking through at some of the Flames of War stuff, I look and I'm like, I'm not a big fan of it. And that's kind of the other big problem. These two problems is the scale of what I have available, and then of course what they're selling. Again, the vehicles are amazing, but the infantry I'm not a huge fan of. So I was thinking about it, and but there are a couple things here to consider. Firstly, they're 15 millimeter. They're very, very small. And when you look at them in a picture, they're going to look a whole lot different than they do on your table. Recently, I was taking some pictures of some miniatures that I painted. I painted like a Captain America or something. I thought, as I'm looking at it, holding it, I think, this looks amazing. I'm very happy with how this came out. And I took a picture and I looked at the picture, and the picture's slightly zoomed in. You can see a lot easier than you can with your naked eye. And I'm like, this looks terrible. Looking at this, you can see all these little paint things that you cannot see with your naked eye. And I'm like, it just looks messy and sloppy. And I'm like, it looks terrible to me. And so I think photographing these tiny little figures, much smaller, they're half the size of the Dust Tactics or whatever, so I think that's, I got to think about it in that aspect or whatever. So both of those things are working towards it. So I thought, let me take a couple of options here. So firstly, I ordered like the cheapest pack I can get. It was like a $15 thing, and I just ordered like a couple of guys and a machine gunner. I don't have anything place local to do it, so I just went on Amazon and just found something that was like, it was like $10 or $12, and it was like a $3 or $4 shipping or whatever it was. And so while I waited for those to arrive, to really look at it in person, because if I'm going to spend this much time and energy, I think $15 is worthwhile to sample this, to get a free sample of these soldiers, so to speak. Now, the other thing is, now I have a tendency to be a little crazy and, do some crazy things. And I thought, should I just buy larger scale models, build my cities the way I want to, and invest that kind of money? Now, there's two problems here. Number one, the Flames of War game is played on a 4-foot by 6-foot mat. So now I would have to have an 8-foot by 12-foot mat, which is a very large amount of space. That's one. The second problem is that the tanks and things, instead of, spending, I don't know, $50 for 20 tanks, I don't know, whatever, like I'd be spending like probably $30 per tank. And that's going to be very, very, very pricey. So I started thinking about other alternatives there. One of which was, I've mentioned a number of times in this video for some reason, was the Dust Tactics stuff. Now, back in the day, Dust Tactics, they were sold off from Fantasy Flight, and Battlefront actually, ironically here, joined up with Dust Tactics to create a Kickstarter. Now, there was a huge problem with that, and both companies had a kind of egg on their face and had a big falling out, and wherever you read, you can read one was in the wrong, the other was in the wrong, whatever. I'm not going to go into that here, but that was a huge thing. And then at the same time, Fantasy Flight, having dissolved their partnership with Dust Studios, said, okay, here's that stuff, and they sort of were getting rid of it. So there was this little window of opportunity where I must have I spent like $300 or something, and I must have bought thousands of dollars worth of miniatures. I mean, it was crazy. It was like something that was like a $50 item, you'd buy it for $4. And so I thought, hey, I wonder if that stuff is still super cheap. And so I went to, because I thought I could just buy loads and loads of these, like tanks and soldiers and things. Well, turns out, I went and looked, and Dust Studios has since folded up sometime in the pandemic, crushed a lot of businesses, a lot of things went out of business. But they were one of the casualties of the pandemic. And now, because of that, everything that I was looking for online was like, which I could probably have bought $9 or $8 before for a walker or something, was now hundreds of dollars. So that was kind of a little interesting thing. So I was like, okay, well, that's not really going to work out. I talked to my wife. I kind of had this little fantasy. I was like, hey, it'd be kind of cool to like take the garage and make, I hate this term man cave, but sort of make a whole thing. And VR is something that I've been doing. I'm trying to get into that and trying to explore that whole world. That's a whole other thing. But I was thinking about it. And I was like, oh, I could have a space to VR in there, so I don't run into things or wander outside with a gun stock on me. I'm gonna so somebody's gonna think I'm a mass shooter or something. So I was like, I can't do that. So I thought, I could make I could be out there modeling and setting these big tables up and stuff, and just have that kind of room in the garage. But that's a pretty tall order to ask your spouse to take over the entire garage, and it's a bit crazy. So that didn't really work out. But I did receive my little test subjects, and they looked fine. I wasn't overwhelmingly excited about them. They weren't really, but I think they're going to work. And given the fact that all the other problems of it, I think it's a compromise. And I'm not a big, as I've learned going forward, one of the greatest skills you could ever learn in your life, and I use this all the time in my life, in my personal life, in my relationship, my marriage and everything, is compromise. And that's kind of where I had to fall. But before, I did forget to mention this. I thought about Bolt Action, one of the other games I was looking into. They have a whole line, and I thought I could buy those. That would be a little problem solver. It wouldn't solve the space side of it, but it would solve the buying the miniature side of it. But I looked at their minis, and no offense to you if you like the way they look, but I did not care for the way the Bolt Action infantry and stuff like that looked. I looked through them, and I just thought, no, this doesn't bring joy. These pictures, these images that they've chosen to create these dioramas, they just didn't aesthetically fit with my personal choice. So that was another little avenue I thought I could go, and sort of, didn't go that route. Now, what I did remember was at some point I had made a lot of paper terrain. I made a whole Western village, and it was sort of washed out looking, but it was kind of cool, but took up a lot of space and stuff, so I no longer have it. But I did also try to build, and did build a bunch of different buildings for some wargaming. Now, these were in full color. They looked really good, but I also was able to add a little realism to them by adding in some transparencies, some clear plastic to make smashed windows and things, and I put some dirt and stuff around, and I did what I could to make them look a little more realistic. Now, the files that you get for printing these, well, you can just print them smaller. And so I was looking at this range, and you got a lot of freedom to be able to switch, it's a two-door building, and you can kind of pick one of several backgrounds or whatever, and you can kind of mix and match to make a lot more variety than you would see just in those, the ones that they're offered or whatever. And so I thought to myself, if I could just print these a much smaller scale, I think they would look really good. And I think adding maybe some little wooden pieces and, some, smaller plastic pieces and things, and some dust and some dirt and some little trees, I think that could be much, work very well for me and be a very inexpensive way to build a city and things. And so I thought, okay, well, that's the way I'll go. And I looked around for some other terrain and stuff for this, but we'll kind of touch on that, I think, in maybe a later video where we kind of go into that a little more. So now I'm left with the last part of this, which is theater of war, which is a tough but exciting choice. Where do I want to go? Where do I want to go in this conflict? And I remember, I really love the Pacific theater, the jungle and stuff. And I'm thinking about terrain, of course, with this. I can do jungle stuff and do the Japanese and the Americans and really, follow that conflict as it's going on, right? So that's a very exciting thing. The number one thing that comes to my mind first, though, is Stalingrad. Germans, Soviets, that's a very fascinating conflict. And that urban warfare, you can have little statues in the city, and you can make these little bombed out buildings that I was showing before with the paper terrain and stuff. And that seems to be really, really exciting to me. That whole thing is just fascinating, a fascinating front of the war. I mentioned before reading that Army of Dawn, looking at the North African conflict to be a good jumping in point with the sand dunes and that kind of, I think it'd be a little less of an entry in terms of building and creating things, because there's all these open, dunes and just hills and things, and you have buildings, of course, but I think it's a lot more scaled back. Of course, Rommel is very fascinating. It'd be interesting to look at that sort of thing. So North Africa, another really good little area to pick. Then there's the Battle of the Bulge, another one that's very interesting to me. The Ardennes Forest. I remember my father, I mentioned him in an earlier episode, he would just sit and look at maps. It's so, as a child, I was like, that's so weird. And now, we have Google Earth and stuff. We're really spoiled with that. And I wish that he could have been able to try a lot of that stuff. My father and I didn't really see eye to eye. Mostly, we really butted heads quite a lot. But, when I think about World War II and being interested in this stuff now, I wish I had him as being able to bond a little bit about that stuff. He was just absolutely loved it, and he would just sit, like I said, and just look at maps and just look at things. And he'd be like, I'd be walking by, maybe whichever, it was just me, it was just whoever was walking by. I think he'd be like, come in here for a second. And I remember one time he just did that. He was laying in bed and he had all these atlases piled around. And he was showing me a map, and he was explaining the Battle of the Bulge. It's kind of neat, though, if you're excited about something and you want to share that, and that's what he was doing. He just wanted to talk about it. And he explained the Battle of the Bulge to me and how, how it occurred and what the bulge was, and he was pointing out stuff on the map and stuff. And, I just have that memory, and I'm like, and of course, I love that setting and the idea that it's this last-ditch attack of the Germans, and they're this is pushed through. Of course, this generals thought it was preposterous and everything. But the idea of like this, I don't know, could it work for them or whatever? And the setting of the snow and the trees and just trying to work their way through, that's very fascinating. I love when my wife and I vacation, we always go to like, we've been to the, Arctic Circle a couple of times and stuff. So we really love that and snow and stuff, especially modeling and dioramas and stuff, like just dusting that snow over. Oh, looks incredible to me. And so Battle of the Bulge is very, very appealing to me. And then of course, the D-Day landings, you could build the little fortifications. You could have the anti-tank, the Czech hedgehogs, I believe they're called. Those little crosses sort of everywhere. I mean, that would be very cool. I have a gaming mat actually that has water on one side, and it's probably made just for that conflict. But I thought, oh, that'd be really cool. And visually, you could have the little ships and things on the edge of the board, and your soldiers moving forward and stuff. And as a teen at some point, I can't remember exactly what year it came out, but seeing Saving Private Ryan, like, this is pretty impactful, being able to watch that and see the Rangers go through and stuff. So that's another good avenue to go through. So there's a lot of interesting theaters of war to progress through. So when I have this hard choice, I gotta look back to my original thought, which was, to approach this like a long journey and enjoy making things and not being rushed and just enjoying the whole process and slowly going through. And for that reason, I think it makes the most sense just to start chronologically. So start in that's not chronologically completely, but I think start in North Africa, and that's a nice jump in because it's not super heavy making the boards and stuff, but I can work on painting and building cities and things for a later battle. For next year I can work on Stalingrad, start with North Africa now, then next year do Stalingrad, then do, maybe the year after that kind of work on the D-Day stuff, and the year after that do the Battle of the Bulge, and then, into Germany or whatever. So I can kind of like plan things out like that, but this is, I think, is a good jumping on point. And so, and I can, revisit that Army at Dawn and then go through like the Day of Battle, which is the second book in that, read a little bit about Rommel. I don't know that much about him. I mean, I know his reputation, of course, he's very famous, but I don't necessarily know that much. So it'd be interesting to learn a bit about him, and I think that's going to be a best place to start. So it makes sense with my little journey philosophy. So that's episode 3. We've solved a bunch of other little problems that have cropped up. First world problems, I guess. So thanks for joining me. I don't really use social media too much, but please feel free to comment below. Hopefully I can respond, but I guess there's no promises. But thank you.